collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, it's the forest fire season in Cyprus, and the fire department reminds us that lighting fires is illegal.
It's forbidden for anyone to make fire. There are rules and regulations. There are strong penalties with financial and imprisonment penalties that they cover all the Cyprus territory.
And we talked to a writer and filmmaker who was growing up in Nicosia in 1974 and has documented her experiences.
It was a sort of like a very open and warm and friendly place to live, and quite idyllic. And then in 1974, suddenly you couldn't go to the end of your street because it was blocked off. Half of your friends were on the other side of the wall and you couldn't see them.
I'm sure we all remember the dreadful forest fires last year in the Troodos Mountains. And this time of year, it's always a dangerous time in terms of the protection of our forests from those fires. Joining us on the programme this week is the press and PR spokesman for the Cyprus Fire Service, Andreas Ketis. Andreas, a lot of people now, it's the middle of August, they're off on their holidays. Many of them go up in the mountains or go camping, and these are the times, aren't they, when it's really important that they remember what not to do so that we don't have a disaster like last year.
For sure, there is a lot of human activity nowadays because of the vacation. What we are saying, we want the people to be very, very careful. First of all, we don't want, it's forbidden the rejection of cigarette butts. They have to be very careful. Also, the food preparation outside of the legitimate areas.
So we're saying basically there about the food that you can't just take your little souvlaki stove and light it anywhere. You must use the pits,
of course,
that are in the forest and therefore protecting the sparks from spreading.
There are the fire prevention meters. So it's forbidden to prepare their food anywhere else except of these places. And moreover, we want them to be very careful. If they realize that something goes wrong or someone of the people make fires on purpose, or if they realize that there is a human activity which behind of it are malicious or deliberate actions, they should not fear to mention this to the relevant authorities, police, fire service.
So what are the numbers that people should call? Because I think there are forest lookout stations now, there are the police, and there are emergency numbers. What should somebody do if they see something they feel needs reporting?
First of all, they have to call to the emergency services. We have the 112, is the European number. We have the 199 and the 1407, which actually is for the forest fires, but in any one of these numbers, if they call, they will respond, the appropriate authority will respond.
It's a difficult time at this time of year for the fire service, because I guess, like everybody else, people want to go on holiday. How do you manage to make sure there are enough staff still in all the relevant areas, because forest fires are one thing, but very often empty houses, electrical faults, there can be fires in town as well. How do you manage all of that?
We have the minimum personnel that they have to work in each fire station. So, a part of this, we can minimize the personnel. For example, for a certain fire station, the minimum shift personnel should be 8 persons. So if the shift is 10 persons, we have 2 only license for the vacation. So taking in mind that there will be not less than 8 firefighters on duty, that's the way that we try to continue working with the minimum personnel.
But when we have a disaster like the Solea fire last year, do you call people back off leave?
Of course, we call people which were not on duty, and we call them back in order to respond and to have enough people to reinforce the teams there.
The one thing we've talked about mostly is actions that cause fires. But if you're out walking in the mountains, things like broken glass that you happen to see that you didn't put there can cause fires as well, can't they, when the sun's hot?
They can cause fires under certain situations, and for example, it depends from the glass, what exactly glass is. If the glass is under heat,
yeah, but if the sun catches it for enough time...
It's not so easy to cause a fire from a glass. We say always that behind of each fire there is a cause. Statistically proved, 94% behind the cause is the human activity.
Right, and the worrying thing about the human activity, you mentioned it earlier, is the malicious setting of fires.
Yes.
Do we know why people do that? I mean, when you catch these people and they're taken to court, is there any indication what made them do something?
It's very difficult, because you should marry the evidence with the people that you accuse. And in this case of fires, there is no enough evidence. Everything are destroyed. So it's very difficult to marry these things. But it's not only the people that you mentioned before. We have fires starting because of ignorance of people, because of negligence, or, as I said before, because of malicious or deliberate actions.
And the other things are people burning rubbish in their backyards. I think that's how the last big fire started. And we have the farmers burning stubble, which is against the law.
Of course, it's against the law. It's forbidden to make fire, except from some cases from December until 15th of March, in order to burn disease branch of trees. Sometimes when the height of the village is more than 1,000 meters, we can accept to burn this until the end of March.
And that's because those are naturally probably had snow in the winter, so that the ground is still wet.
They have to take all the fire prevention meters. They have to have a license from the local authority. They have to inform the fire brigade that they will plan to burn something. And they have to have the license in their hand. But, as we said before, it's forbidden for anyone to make a fire. There are rules and regulations. There are strong penalties with financial and imprisonment penalties that they cover all the Cyprus territory.
The big month, of course, for fires here, I think because of the strong winds, is June. But August also has
yes. Analyzing the statistic data up to the month of June, we observe that each month we have a significant reduction. We have been waiting the reduction to be continued in July, because we observe that every July we didn't have the strong winds as we have in June and August. Nevertheless, this July we have strong winds, in combination with environmental conditions, the increased temperatures, the low humidity also, and the dry grass and wild vegetation we have in Cyprus. They are extremely helpful factors of starting a fire and the rapid spread and development of fire. So we have July with strong winds and all the others I mentioned before. And we had 4 at least huge fires. And let me remind you the fire of Hora, Laia, Babatsigna, which was in the 19th of July in Larnaca district area, which burned us, perhaps it was 2.5 square kilometers of forest and wild vegetation. We have in district area of Paphos on the 12th of July another huge fire which burned us 1.5 square kilometers also. And we have the fires also in Paphos, in Kathikas, Theletra, on the 27th of July, which burned us 8 hectares. And also the Goudi, Skouli, Gritutera, Drusha, Holi, Skouli, in this area of Paphos with 12 hectares. And also we have in July another rural and forest fires in all the other district areas of Cyprus, such as Limassol, Famagusta, Nicosia. And these fires, based on their nature, the environmental conditions, the relief of the ground with the inaccessible areas, are very difficult to be approached and extinguish them.
Yeah, it's particularly difficult, isn't it, for the land-based firefighters? But
Exactly.
now we have more fighters in the air. How much is
Yes.
that helping
Yes, it's
in
very
controlling these
It's
things?
very helpful. At the very beginning of the fires, and based on the data that we were accepted, we have been activated a huge number of ground forces, and moreover, we activate all the national firefighting air forces for the extinguishing of these fires. But we invest as a fire service on people consciousness. That's why we want to make all understand that every fire have many disasters, not only fortunes, but on people.
And we lost some firemen
Yes.
last year.
Yeah.
So remind us again then, Andreas, the numbers that people should probably write down somewhere or put in their phones so that they have immediate access to the emergency numbers if they need to report something.
It's 112, the European number, the 199, and the 1407, which is more than the forest fire. But if they call to anyone of this number, they will respond, the appropriate authority will respond and help them.
So let's keep the rest of August and indeed the rest of the year fire-free in our beautiful countryside. We've been talking to the spokesperson for the Cyprus Fire Department, Andreas Gertis.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
At the International Cyprus Film Festival recently, the Aphrodite Cinematic Award went to Victoria Harwood Butler Sloss for a film that has been shown around Cyprus recently. Victoria, tell us first about the film and how you came to make it.
The film A Flock of Birds is based on a chapter from my book, A Seamstress of Orpha, which is going to be published next April by Armida Publishing here in Cyprus. And it's one of my favourite chapters in the book, and I love it. It's about a very irascible character who tells us the story on her deathbed. So the film actually starts off with, "So that's me, I'm dead. But let me tell you this secret." And she tells us this secret about her life. And it's based on a real character, which is my great-great-aunt. And she was the stay-at-home mother, stay-at-home sort of sister-in-law, and looked after all of the children, and looked after her brother, and cooked, and never really had a family of her own. And there was a bit of a scandal about her when she was younger, because she started swelling up in the belly. And everyone thought, well, she's been off and, got herself pregnant. And it turned out not to be a pregnancy. And in fact, she did die just alone, and still the stay-at-home sister-in-law who did nothing. And I always felt very sorry for her, so I gave her an alternative ending. So I wrote this chapter in the book, and while I was sending out the submissions for getting the book published, instead of sitting there and biting my nails and being anxious, I thought, why don't I just make a little film about it? And I was going to do something very sort of artistic, but my family were turning up in LA to visit me, and I thought, I'll just put them in costume and give them roles to play, and they'll play the characters. So they got off the plane, and I said, wear that, stand there, do this, and I made it into a film.
How long is the film?
It's half an hour long.
So it's, it's not a feature film, but it's certainly not what we call a short film.
Yeah, you would still call it a short. There are different parameters when you submit films to film festivals as to what is a short. Sometimes they say under 15 minutes, sometimes under half an hour. Mine comes in at 29 minutes and 50 seconds.
But it's all based, I think, as you said, on the family history.
Yes.
And you kept a diary, didn't you?
I did. In fact, also at the International Film Festival, they showed my other film, which is a little documentary, Cyprus Summer 1974. And I made that about a diary that I wrote when I was 13, and I lived very near the presidential palace in Nicosia, and I woke up one morning to the sounds of war, and I decided to tear out the pages of my school book and to keep recording everything that was going on. So I literally kept a diary for about 6 weeks during the coup and invasion, and the last entry is when Roger Davis was sadly shot dead. I was in England at that time, we'd been evacuated. So I literally wrote down everything as it was happening, like bombs falling, I can see the fire at the English school and things like that. And stuck the diary in the bottom of a drawer for 40 years, and then decided what to do with it and made it into an exhibition, which I did in 2014 for the 40th anniversary. And we had this lovely little exhibition where I blew up the pages of the diary and had them on the wall of this little shop. And it was very emotional. People would come and read the diary. I thought they might just read a page or two, but they would read it from beginning to the end and cry. And it was almost like I was having therapy sessions every night. And I told a friend of mine about it, who was a filmmaker, and she said, make a little documentary about it. So I filmed the setting up of the diary, and then I put a little bit of background information as to, you know, who I was, how my family came to be here, and, you know, what it was like to live in Cyprus pre-1974 and afterwards, the after effects it had on friends and family.
So how did your family come to be here?
I'm half Armenian, so the Armenian half of my family came here via Aleppo in Syria. So they started off in the Ottoman Empire, in Urfa, which is now called Sanli Urfa. It's where everyone goes when they want to join ISIS, because it's very near the border to Aleppo. So then family moved to Aleppo. They rebuilt their lives in Aleppo. And then from Aleppo, they moved to Cyprus in the 1930s. And my grandfather had a shirt shop here. Everyone who ever had a shirt made in Cyprus knows my grandfather. They're like, oh, I've got an Avakian shirt, or my grandfather has an Avakian shirt. And he was very social. He was, you know, he liked wine, women and song, and was quite a character. So my family grew up here, and my father was in the British Army, and he was here during the Ioka times, and he saw and fell in love with my mother, and her sister was supposed to get married first, her older sister, and there was a problem getting the permits for her wedding, so they went to the fortune teller. And the fortune teller said, no, your little sister has to get married first. So my father, who is now in Baghdad, had proposed to my mother, and she accepted his proposal by letter. He sent her an engagement ring by mail. She put it on her finger, and then my mother and my aunt got married more or less at the same time, and pregnant at the same time. So I have a brother and a cousin who are like twins, born a few days apart. And then we all grew up mostly in Cyprus. We went backwards and forwards to England, but more or less lived here until I was 18. And then I went off to London.
And you said about the difference between pre- and post-1974. How would you encapsulate that?
I know that there were troubles, like in 1963 and 67, but on the whole, growing up here when Cyprus was an independent country was very, very free, very, very open. I just had a screening of the film last night, and the number of people who came up and said, oh my God, the flares, the hair, the music, the jumping in the car and going off to the beach. Ayia Napa didn't have any hotels there. I think the Nissi Beach Hotel was there. We used to camp in what were sand dunes, where now the Gresham Bay Hotel is. You didn't have to lock your door, it was a really free and open paradise, really. And I think everyone was very inclusive. It didn't matter if you were Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot, Armenian, English, people who were here working in embassies and in banks and things like that, the expats who lived here, people who went to school in England and came only for the summer. It was a sort of like a very open and warm and friendly place to live, and quite idyllic. And then in 1974, suddenly you couldn't go to the end of your street because it was blocked off. Half of your friends were on the other side of the wall and you couldn't see them. And it had effects on, friends of mine who couldn't cope and took to drink and drugs and just crazy behaviour. So I did lose quite a lot of my friends early on. I think today they'd call it PTSD or something. I don't know.
But you mentioned the troubles in the early 60s. You were, I suppose, a bit young to remember those, were you?
Actually, there's an interesting story which I didn't understand. But the very first memory I have is when I was 2 years old, and we were living on Leader Street. And I remember my parents having this horrible, horrible argument because my father was crying. And as a young 2-year-old, I was astonished that a man was crying. I saw women cry and children cry, but this is why it's the first memory I have in my life. I don't remember anything, else from this time. And I found out years later why. And what had happened is that my father, who had been in the British Army and was no longer in the British Army, he came back and he was helping... God, this is going to be such as like a political firebrand I'm going to set off here, but he was helping Greek Cypriots train with arms to arm themselves against, the skirmishes that were happening. So he was teaching them how to use guns. One of the fellas that he was teaching how to use a gun and, do training had an argument with him. And he happened to be an ex-Ioka person. And so they had words, they had an argument, and the guy said, well, I'm going to kill you. So my father said, well, whatever, and, ignored it. But the threat was real because the guy who threatened to kill him was ex-Ioka, and a lot of the ex-Ioka men knew my grandfather from buying shirts at his shop. And they went to him and they said, he's a hothead and this is a real threat and he has threatened to kill your daughter's husband and he will be dead by the end of today. And my father was put on a plane that night and disappeared off to England. So we had to follow. So it really did have an effect on our lives, although I didn't know that till many years later, because I didn't get told this story. I just remember the first memory of them crying, and now I understood why he was crying, because within 2 or 3 hours he was shipped off. They basically said, you have to get on a plane and go. And nobody touched us or my mother's family or anything, but once my father was out of the way, that was it. So we were separated for about 1.5 years. And then we went to follow him in England later. And then my mother was terribly miserable because she hated it. She was away from her family and it was raining and cold and she was all alone. So, it sets up this pattern of, where is your home, really? You either get separated and live in separate countries, or one of you is miserable in one country or under a death threat in another.
Okay, and talking of living abroad, you're now based, I think, in California.
Yes, I live in Los Angeles.
But you come back fairly regularly.
Yes.
When you come back, with all of what you've told me in mind, how do you find Cyprus today?
I have a real love-hate relationship with Cyprus. I come back and, like I had this event last night where I had a little screening with both of the films, and so many people turn up that I haven't seen for years. And they don't say, oh, I'm coming, or they don't respond by email or Facebook or phone, but they just turn up. And I turn around and I'm like, oh my God, these are like my family. This is, no, I get emotional, but it's really lovely to be back where you see very close friends, which you don't have those friendships, those sort of really deep friendships that you've made in Cyprus from all growing up together. On a small island where you all get in and you're all doing things together. So you don't find that. I spent 20 years in London. I have very good friends in London, but the thing about the friendship that you develop in a small island like Cyprus, it just doesn't compare anywhere else. And I love other things about Cyprus as well. I love all of the old architecture and stuff. And then I hate things. I hate the dust. I hate the plastic. I hate the way that people don't throw away their trash, that they just make a beautiful building and then leave all of the trash next to the side of the road. Things like that, enrage me. So I come and I have a sort of real battle with the things that I love and the things that I hate.
And what about the friends that you said ended up on the other side? Are you back in touch with them since the borders opened? Yes.
In fact, I just went over the border anyway. I carried on crossing the border after the border was built. A lot of my friends wouldn't, and a lot of my family definitely wouldn't. But I had a friend who worked at the British High Commission at the time. He said, come over with me, and I went. And on the first day I was there, I bumped into a very handsome young Turkish boy that I had my eye on, and I was like, well, this is good. So I carried on going back over there regularly and visiting friends on the north. And now, of course, the border is open. I still see them. So I'm very happy that the border has opened up, but I just really wish we could do away with it altogether, actually. I think if we could just get rid of the whole border would make me happy. If we could have some kind of unification here, I think is what most people really want in their hearts.
Is there another film if it happens?
Oh, God. Well, actually, I have got another film in the can, which I filmed last year, which is all about the Armenian cemetery, which is in no man's land. And then there are a lot of other cemeteries which I discovered, the Maronites and the Catholics. And I became fascinated with the idea of living your life in a country and then being buried in somewhere that is...
neither one nor the other.
Exactly. I found that very interesting. So, yes, I'm a storyteller, so you never know. If there is unification here, yeah, that camera might come out.
And where can people find out more about the work that you've done?
I put most of my stuff on Facebook, so if you go to Facebook, you can look up, I have a specific page for Cyprus Summer 1974, which has the news about that film, and also A Flock of Birds. They both have their own Facebook pages. I am going to build a website because I've got a book coming out in April next year, and they're sort of behind me saying, get that website done. So that's my next thing, is to get a website up, and everything will be on there. So once I have it, and I already know that I've already got the domain name, and it will be planetvix.com. It's not published yet, but when it is, everything will be there. All of my past acting work, voiceover work, writing, films, projects, everything will be in one place.
We never spoke about the acting. We'll have to do that next time you're over.
Fantastic. Yes, let's do it.
We've been talking to Victoria Harwood Butler-Sloss, who won the Aphrodite Cinematography Award at the recent Cyprus International Film Festival in Paphos. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.